We try to start promptly. Welcome to spring. Yeah. Thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to have Bob Gibbons with us. Bob's professor of economics and I guess also in the management school at MIT, where he's been for a while. Before that, he was at Cornell. As I said to Bob, when I think about organizations, I think about Bob Gibbons, because I think he, more than anyone, has caused us to think about different forms of contracting and how organizations inside of the organization, in the way that Coase got us thinking about it, Bob's been taking us and pushing that envelope quite a bit. So we're going to, I don't know where Bob's going to take us. He gave us these two readings as background, which we read, and he's got 5 minutes, but I told him for him to let us know what he wants to talk about, and we'll do that.
Thank you very much. I hope it wouldn't count as part of my 5 minutes if I got oriented in a multidisciplinary setting like this and asked everybody to go around and tell me your name and what field you're in. As long as that doesn't count on my 5 minutes.
That won't count in 5 minutes.
My name's Kelly. I'm a law student here.
Uh-huh.
My name's John. I'm a visiting scholar.
You can tell me your last names too.
John Eldon.
My name is Rick Harbaugh. I'm in the Business Economics Department.
Jim Walker in Economics.
Frederick Procati, I'm the Associate Director here in Political Science and Law.
I'm Christine Eller, I'm in the Anthropology Department. I'm a student.
There we go. MIT does not learn anthropology. Right.
Hi, I'm Sarah Bowerly-Gansman, an Assistant Professor in International Studies, and I'm a political scientist.
Jess Steinberg, political science and international studies.
Dean Luke, economics.
Julio Ramos, PhD student in economics.
Hi, I'm Johan Olvera. I'm a PhD student at SPIA, Public Affairs.
Nick Snow, I'm in economics.
Tyler Margettis, I'm a postdoc in cognitive science and in SPIA.
And I'm Christina Limburger. I'm just a member of the general public visiting. I was a grad student in anthropology way back in the 70s when Clifford Geertz was all the rage.
There you go. I
Still is.
Yeah.
I'm Anthony Batty. I'm in political science and public administration.
Great. Thank you all. Okay. So, right. 5 minutes. Are you kidding me? So I have 4 things, and you'll. Does that show up as a sort of bright purple magenta color in the back there, Sarah? So, so all the important stuff is in that color, and if you're colorblind, I hope it anyway doesn't look the same as the black. We could fully stop at any point, or we could pause at any point and dive in. But those are the 4 things I hope we cover. I apologize for not having the suitable document for this kind of discussion, right? I have something that's too short, something that's too long, but anyway. And then what I'm proposing to defer is the stuff that I'm in contrast to, because I would say more about that if we had more time, but maybe we'll get to it. All right. Okay. Hey, Mike. Good to see you. So the first point is actually in 2 parts, 1A and 1B. So Lee and I have already been talking about what is culture, even the small c culture, et cetera, et cetera. So one way to say this is, I have for purposes of today, I have a completely derived interest in culture. Okay? So I'm going to end up talking about something that I will call culture, but actually, I'm struggling to start learning cognitive science in a way that is connected to what I mean here. So what I'm actually interested in are these relational contracts in settings that might be inside organizations, but they might be in lots of other settings as well. And let's call all of them the governance of value creation, and that would certainly include common pool resources and so on. So for me, that's going to lead to this interest in culture. Okay, so that's the first version of part 1, the orientation. here's a second version of the orientation. So usually this is my second slide right away. They say, what can an economist do to help a fixed set of people collaborate better together? Okay, and so collaborate is, there's going to be a lot of weight on defining what kind of setting one means when one starts talking about collaborate here. Hint, bad or non-existent contracts will be an important part of this. So my friend, the sociologist Steve Barley, says, what can an economist do to help a fixed set of people collaborate better together? Nothing. You should leave, right? And so, but I'm still here. I'm working on it. Okay, so we're going to ignore Barley. And where that's going to take us is, so this is sort of my sample selection point. It's going to say, for the things I'm fuzzily talking about when I say collaboration, write a better formal contract is not an available option. Okay, so seeing collaboration as an equilibrium thing is part of what I mean by collaboration, as well as part of what I mean by equilibrium. So that's normal. I think lots of people in organizational economics will see that kind of thing. What's not normal is that italicized word right there, right? So we're much more likely to pick an equilibrium without, as again some sociology friends would say, problematizing the building of the equilibrium. How do you actually get there? And so this is where I'm adoring these 6 words. And another way to connect these things is there are lots and lots of models of relational contracts as ways that parties might collaborate. They all just take it for granted that there's an enormous amount of shared meaning that we can already build on. For example, when the modeler writes down a prisoner's dilemma model, you've made it common knowledge between the parties that consummate collaboration is top left. Okay? And I need models where it's unclear what, Rick and I, we were out for a beer last night with Dean, right? But we go out for a beer because we're trying to explain to each other what's consummate collaboration going to look like. Go down the 8 principles, graduated sanctions, whoops, what's the kind of situation where we need sanctions at all? How fast do they scale up? Can't be clear about all that stuff. Got to build a shared understanding. And so that's where I'm trying to go. Okay, so that's the orientation. Now, maybe I shouldn't be using the word culture at all. I am using the small c here, but I was at the Paris School of Economics at the end of March where they had a conference on big C culture and big I institutions, and I was, the amusement or whatever I was, right? The Lions and the Christians, or I don't know what I was, but in any case, let's just point out that there are a whole lot of different definitions. Even back in 1952, it's a complicated subject, and here's the definition that the Paris School of Economics crowd was preferring, is that kind of, let's call that the big C definition of culture. Okay, so I want to be clear that's not what I'm talking about. And so, Hofstede talking about culture's consequences is big C seeping into the organization. My emeritus colleague, these are the Google Scholar citations of like last week or something, at Schein is very different. He's going to be talking about culture built within the organization, and that's the distinction I'm trying to raise. Okay, and I see these as operating at different timescales and with different levels of intentionality. I think they're very different things. This is what happens when you have 160 definitions of a word. Okay, so I do not mean to be saying that culture from seeping in from outside doesn't exist. And here's one lovely paper by my colleague John Van Reenen and Nick Bloom and Rafaela Sadoun. So this is the one where they look at a bunch of multinationals, and those multinationals have a bunch of plants, each one, and the plants, because this is multinational, are frequently in different countries. And so they measure, let's say, the discretionary spending limit for the plant managers. Okay? So we've got a multinational, let's say, with headquarters in France, and a plant in Belgium and a plant in the UK. And then they open up the World Values Survey and they say, what do we find here in the directional trust score from France to Belgium and from France to the UK? And the answer is, on average, the French trust the Belgians more than the French trust the British. Okay? And guess what? That correlates strongly with the discretionary spending limit. Okay, so that's an example of large, slow-moving, external, national, if you want, cultures seeping into the organizational design here. Okay, so that's a real thing. I'm not saying it's not a real thing. It just isn't what I'm trying to talk about. I'm trying to talk about Ed Schein not writing 2 books here and stapling them together. This is not a book on organizational culture followed by a second half on organizational leadership. Leadership, another thing Lee and I have been starting to talk about. I think we agree on everything except we're going to have to do a global replace of that word right there. but everything else, that, and I'm happy with that, actually. I would be perfectly happy to, I don't think the word norm appears on these slides, and I could take out little c culture. It's kind of in there because of the experience in Paris, right, to contrast it to big C culture. But if you told me that what leaders are doing or building new equilibria, I'd be 100% happy with that. Okay? But in any case, this is not culture seeping in from the outside. This is the leader building the culture. Okay? Okay. So one way to say some of this, I guess, oops, the word norm does appear here, sorry about that, is to borrow from the sociologist Paul DiMaggio in an absolutely beautiful survey on culture and cognition, and to distinguish between the regulative aspects of culture and sort of the cognitive science part, the constitutive parts, the taken for granted cognitive categories and schema necessary for parties to interact. I'm trying to put that into relational contracting because, if you want the whole argument, I'm perfectly happy to believe that relational contracts are often critical to superior performance, whether we're talking CPRs or firms or anything else. I also believe they're hard to build. And I think one of the reasons, unmodeled as far as I understand, at least in economics, that they're hard to build is we're not operating out of the same categories and schema. So that's the agenda. Okay? Okay, so again, you might think that Schein is operating here and Hofstede might be operating more there, but whatever. Okay, so that's 2 out of 4. Can I go into number 3 here? How are we doing?
Sure.
Okay, good. All right, so this point is going to be pretty much what I just said, and you can see more of it in a paper with Rebecca Henderson, who was my colleague for a long time at MIT, and around 2004 walked into my office and said, "Hey Gibbons, those relational contracts that you guys work on, they're more important than you know," which I took to be like part compliment and part insult. Something like that. And so she's a strategy person, right? So what she means is, yeah, Bob, great, you guys have figured out a way to write down in math the informal aspects of organizations that sociologists have known about for a long time, but your models imagine that everybody always gets to the frontier. They get to the second best, let's say, right? I, a strategy person, believe that actually these are sources of competitive advantage, meaning if you succeed in building one, not everybody's going to catch up, right? And, since we have lawyers here, I gave a version of this talk at Yale Law School last Monday. And it was all Bob Ellickson, Coes and Cattle, Shasta County, and, some places have built or found themselves in a better equilibrium and some not, right? So, okay. So, the take I have here is coming actually from a quotation in Acemoglu and Robinson, and it's going to lead, I think, to some teaching at MIT where we're taking institutions and organizations and putting those discussions together. Maybe we have just the book for that. So this is my perspective, right? This is me channeling Saturday March on what does life look like inside organizations, or March 1962, the business firm as a political coalition, right? So unresolved conflict inside organizations. I'm hoping somebody here will give me a beautiful parallel quotation for how tough life is in a CPR before they get their act together or something. And here's the thing that Acemoglu and Robinson are quoting on page 56 or something of their book. This is Abba Lerner, 1972, emphasis in the original. Economics has gained the title of Queen of the Social Sciences by choosing, I wish in a way that he had italicized choosing, but he didn't. He italicized solved political problems as its domain. So, man, oh man, is it time to work on unsolved political problems. Okay? All right. So what's a relational contract? I'm going to hope that this is all redundant, but maybe that you know this definition, and that you probably out in the world might express it as that definition. These magenta ones maybe are more helpful, right? Like a shared understanding of the appropriate exercise of discretion. So we were talking about institution as somebody with the authority to state and enforce the rules. So enforcement might well be discretionary, right? And so when, Lee, are you supposed to cut off my time, right? Or something like that, right?
Pretty soon.
Pretty soon, yeah, okay. So this relates to informal organization. There's a lovely quotation from Granovetter. This relates to culture. Here's more from Ed Schein. And it relates to what Rebecca would call organizational capability, right? Why is your firm doing more with the same inputs than mine is? And so these are examples from sort of human resource management, but it gets to decentralization and between firms and CPRs and all that stuff. So, why is John Farragut, the political scientist, named down there? At some point he said, we're really good at explaining stuff that lasted 100 years. Okay, you're sampling on the dependent variable. And you got two problems. One is, whoops, what about the attempts to do these things that aren't in the data because they failed? And at least as interestingly, so call those earthquakes. Lee and I started a relationship, there was an earthquake, and it's not in the data anymore. Smaller than earthquakes, there are hiccups. So what's the role of hiccups in shaping the details of the relationship we wind up with? Right, so I want path dependence. Those are both path dependent arguments, right? And so that last thing, okay, that was point 3. That at least my interest in these relational contracts is that they are useful for the governance of value creation, but they're hard to build. So why are they hard to build? Okay, so here's like the world's simplest trust game, right? So I now hate this. I refuse to build models like this anymore, even though I have committed that sin a lot, right? Why? Because this model already labels what behaviors are trust and not trust, and what behaviors are honor and betray, right? And so, if I come in here with 50 minutes of slides, that's betray, given right? But anyway. Then, what about if I came in here with 25 minutes of slides? Or 17, right? And so, okay. All right. So, here is something that's my second slide in my MBA class, because when you teach at the Sloan School of Management, this is a good slide to have. And so, Alfred P. Sloan, right, spent 50 years at General Motors and 5 years writing this book. And what genius advice does he give us at the end? And I think it is genius advice. He says, basically, young person, what you need to understand is centralized decentralization. What do I have for you after 55 years? A contradiction. X and not X. Deal with it. Okay? So, and he says, it's not an easy concept to apply. Thank you very much, right? And the responsibility for it is a continuing one. It's not like you set a bunch of light switches or other dials and you're good to go, right? So where's the model of that, right? What if Alfred P. Sloan hires us at General Motors and he greets us? What does onboarding look like at General Motors? He shows up and he says, the way we work here is centralized decentralization. And then, he goes off and does this chairman thing, and now, then other people say, he really means it. Right? But you'll get it over time. And how do we build an understanding of a contradiction? So, oops. Okay, so this slide was from Yale Law School. Okay, not just 8 principles of what the governance of a CPR looks like, but building an understanding of what they're going to mean, right? And watching in the world attempts at a homogeneous rollout of those principles working out heterogeneously, I think would be fascinating. Other fields are doing this. This is my colleague Catherine Kat Turco. This is the single best thing that's entered my brain about organizations in the last 5 years. It's about a social media firm where the founders eventually decide, no, we're not actually delegating decision making, but they have a wiki and they mean to be delegating voice. Okay, they mean that that they want to hear from you. And what that opens up is, so wait, you're still the boss. We're not delegating decision rights. We want you to talk. So how do we demonstrate that we're listening? Right? What does that look like? And we're back to the fuzziness of Alfred P. Sloan. This is Shona Brown, who has a couple of academic papers in the ASQ with Kathy Eisenhardt that have lots of cites, but then she went to Google, and she spent 2 90-minute conversations with me that, in the end, she's very kind, using my words. She says, about Google, we were trying to build a new equilibrium. It was fragile. We had to refortify it every day. And I don't know any game theory models of fragile or refortify, right? That's what I want. I think I'm approximately done. No, I have one set of pictures. We could talk about a regression. It's related to the AER. We could talk about an experiment. We could talk about the model that is what you have. But what I want to do is this picture, and then I'm really done. Can I have 90 seconds?
Yeah.
Okay. So many of you, maybe all of you, will know this game called the stag hunt, right? So if we both go hunting for a stag, we'll get one, and that's good. But if I go hunting for a stag and you go hunting for a rabbit, then I get nothing and you get a rabbit. Okay, so you can always get a rabbit if you go hunting for that, but only if we go hunting together can we get a stag. Okay, so now update this. That's from Rousseau or somebody. So now I want you to imagine the stag hunt with the web. Okay, and so the way this works is you can always go and get a rabbit on your own. And whether or not you want to go into the woods together hunting for a stag depends on what's in the woods today. And it might be a stag, in which case it looks just like, that day, it looks just like a stag hunt day. Or it might be a tiger, or something like, you'll die, even with the two of you go hunting for the tiger. That's a bad idea, okay? So I'm putting some state dependence in that says, when would it be smart to go for the stag, and when should everybody go, yeah, okay, let's do rabbits today, right? So, these axes are the dimensions of animals, like how fast they are and how many teeth they have, or something, right? And so your parents were good parents, and they taught you, Here's an example. If the web tells you that today in the woods there's something like a stag, like that animal, you should go hunting in the woods for stag with your partner. But if the web tells you that what's in the woods today is something like a tiger, you shouldn't, okay? And you were a smart kid, and you built this little model, right? You did the perpendicular bisector between those two exemplars, okay? My parents were also good parents, but they gave me different examples, different exemplars, right? And so this is, I don't know, an antelope, and this is, I don't know, a rhinoceros, or whatever it is, right? So I built that model. So we have slightly different models, okay? And as we're starting to collaborate, before the collaboration starts Monday morning at 9 a.m., we go for that beer Sunday night, and we, just to make sure we're on the same wavelength, and we start telling stories, right? Like, and I say, so Lee, that's one where we would hunt together, right? And yes and no, and and there's a limit to, it's last call, they're closing the bar, and there are other reasons that we can't fully articulate the whole space here, right? And so then Monday morning comes, and Monday morning, Tuesday morning, we get some early success, and then on Wednesday this one happens, right? And here our models disagree. And what I want is a world where, I haven't put this ingredient in, I want that you and I look at each other and go, one of us in particular, the one who, I guess this one, who went into the woods when this one didn't, right? And so this one, that was you, I guess, because that was me, says, Gibbons, right. Did we miscommunicate, or am I being gamed? Right? And I think I'm basically done. Okay, we could talk about regressions and experiments or models, but it's a lot longer than 5 minutes, but it's shorter than usual. So
no,
there you go.
Good. There's a lot there. Floor. Federica?
I guess I'm going to start on a sort of like a sad note in some way. Why is a model the endpoint of this reflection? seems to me that there are reasons why we think through different mental models, but by that I mean disciplines. And different disciplines bring to the table something that is ideally slightly different from the other disciplines, but still like capable of establishing the conversation. And I guess that would be a way to think about getting at this problem. That is not necessarily how to model it in sort of like such simplifying ways. And I wonder if there is a fundamental tension there, where this is simply something that we haven't thought through, and that can happen, but and we need to work more on how to create a model that can capture this fine-grained reality. But perhaps we just don't need a model to begin with.
Good. So I was thinking as you were talking, either that I wasn't understanding or that you had two possibilities there, but I think your last sentence had both possibilities. We start from the idea that we don't have a model.
Yeah.
So this could be something where we, and let's come back to who we are, need to think harder to make a model, or it could be something that's unmodelable or unuseful to model. And those are the two possibilities.
Right.
Okay, so first of all, and your first sentence, I think, was, why is this something where the model is the end? So first let me say, I don't think it is the end at all, right? So I'm as interested, tells you my sad feeling about economics, I'm as interested in opening up the view that so many things are unsolved political problems, right? When my colleagues who work on healthcare delivery see some problem in a hospital, A, they can't believe it's running inefficiently. B, if you persuade them that it is, they think that some pretty simple incentive contract ought to do the job. And I'm like, oh boy, right? So I think there's a worldview I'm trying to open up there. I think if we is economics, Paul Krugman in his book on economic geography says two things, and they'll sort of illustrate both sides of what I hear you saying. One thing he says is, like it or not, and I wish he'd written like it and not, in economics, an idea that isn't embalmed in a formal model has a very short half-life. Okay?
That's fine.
So if I want economics to take this up, it will have more traction if somebody figures out how to model it. Okay, I bet you agree with that empirical prediction, right? Whether it's not a normative statement yet, right? Okay, but so even in economics, the model isn't the end goal, and I couldn't, what the heck was I doing at Yale Law School, right? Who was at the dinner table? They had to change the location because it was too broad and large a set of diners, right? It was people from sociology, people from management, people from economics, and people from the law school, right? And so, or the thing that we were talking about at breakfast, that I hope you and I can talk about this afternoon, is this, I just came, not from Boston, but from the Center for Advanced Study, where Woody Powell and I run a 2-week thing in the summer for assistant professors in economics, political science, sociology, and management around governance, if you want, right? So that the end goal for economics isn't even the model, and the end goal isn't even just economics. So, it's a loop, it's a discussion. Is that useful?
Yeah, we can talk more about that.
All right.
Mike, this follows on a little bit on the modeling sort of side. As I was reading your second background paper,
The long one.
Yeah, the long one.
Sorry about that.
I kept expecting you to go in a certain direction, and you never did. And that's Ullmann's correlated equilibrium.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you sound like you know what I'm talking. So why didn't you sort of go in the direction of having these actors that are maybe in the same organization or have been exposed to some of the same experiences are likely to interpret a given situation as the same kind of situation and frame it similarly?
So that paper is, the very boring paper 0, right? All it does is
that's what I thought. Yeah.
We have everybody frames because the world is too complicated, so you gotta be coarser than that. and you and I frame one way, and Rick and Dean frame another way, and if these two dyads walk into the same environment, does one of them get along better than the other, whether that's a one-shot environment or a repeated environment? And then, as close as we come to getting interesting is you and I are underperforming Rick and Dean, so we go watch them, right? And so it's going to look like they're dancing to music that you and I can't hear, right? That they somehow are watching a sunspot or a correlated equilibrium that we can't see, right? So why didn't we go to, just to try to answer your question? The other thing you will have noticed in that paper is a tension, really, that we're getting killed by referees for, honestly, between a straight-up Bayesian information design perspective and actual cognitive interpretation, right? And so we thought it was, cute and maybe productive that we could interpret the math in both of those ways, but the Alman is all about information design, right? Let's roll 3 dice and show you the first 2 and me the second and third, and build some uncertainty and some correlation into that setup. And so honestly, even Marco Lacalzi, who's probably of the 3 of us the one who's the most interested in the straight-up Bayesian approach, said, nah, let's not go there, right? And where we want, all 3 of us really want to go is the cognitive interpretive direction.
What do you mean by that, if I can follow up?
Well, so the first thing is, what if, we pair you and Dean, right? You and I had one set of frames, and Rick and Dean had another set of frames, but then next week, so what does that look like? And I mean my X7 thing, right? Are you guys going to hit a thing where one says to the other, did we miscommunicate or am I being gamed? And that's where I'm going to need a ton of help from the cognitive scientists about updating categories, right? Changing frames. So that's what I mean by that.
Okay. Yeah, just let me follow up on that. And I think a lot of this, and you get into it a little bit in your paper, a lot of it depends on the relationship between the players within an organization.
Yeah.
And here I'm thinking about the role of leadership, and I prefer instead of culture, I prefer the term norm as a repeated pattern of behavior that they have in firms and all kinds of organizations. And norms are typically long-standing patterns of behavior. So can you change them? And I think, yes, they are amenable to change. But then it seems to take into account, that along the way, people are discounting. So suppose you're the leader, and there was a nice paper in the QJE about 6 years ago by Patrick Francois, and I can't remember his co-author right now. Do you know him at UBC? Anyway, it was about changing countries' trajectories, and I'll make this pretty short. So everyone believes their leaders are corrupt because that's all they've seen are corrupt leaders. Okay, that's most of the world. And the leader does something that's seemingly non-corrupt. And all the citizens say, well, that's just off-the-path behavior. He'll be corrupt next term, next round. And then he does it again. And he does it again. So he really has, the way he views this but he agrees it's too simplistic, because he really has this tipping point. But it also is that there is an organization with someone on top, and that if he plays so it's sort of Bayesian, if he plays the non-corrupt card frequently enough, people say, I think he's actually not corrupt. And then they tip, and then their whole behavior changes, and then you're in a new equilibrium.
Yeah.
So is that, because you've done this work on hospitals and things, and it seems as if, do some hospitals change their culture because you have he and I were talking about hospitals and introducing these techniques, and where there was a better culture or more trust between the staff and the doctors, the intervention worked a lot better. But do you also have a category where people change their culture?
Good. So let me back up. When you say norm, I hear relational contract, right? When you say a relational contract is a sustained pattern of behavior, which was near the definition of norm.
I guess I think of a norm as above the. I mean, it is part and parcel of the relationship, but a contract is a contract. So I think of it as a shared mental model, more so.
I see. All right.
By the norm.
Let me come back to DiMaggio here, just to surface some of this, right?
Yeah, so I think of it as.
Which one? Regulative or
no? It's a cognitive.
Yeah, but he said it was this.
Yeah. Well,
okay. So norms can have 320 definitions.
Ways. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. So this is the part of the talk where I will stop using the word norm and stop using the word culture, right? And I will use. I'm interested in relational contracts, and I think our existing models presume too much shared meaning, and we have a project of developing that shared meaning. Okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
So those are, and so, this is not, DiMaggio doesn't put any utility functions here. This is me commenting about either, selection, who have you got here in a Hofstede, which countries, da-da-da kind of way, or socialization, can you change people's preferences, and there are Boyd and Richardson type models of that. And this is different, right? This is, so wait a minute, what state are we in today? Is that a world where the woods are full of tigers or stags, right? And you and I are building a startup together, and we know the hours are going to be killing. But if your daughter's in the state championship soccer game, you should go, right? But the regional championship, maybe not, right? And so what situation is this? I love the thing I love most about our boring paper zero is the first part of the title, which is of course from Goffman. But that's not problematized in the repeated game models. I know I'm supposed to cooperate in most situations, but not all. Which situation is this? Right? And there's too much shared meaning in those models for my taste. So then there's the question of types. So Tirol, I'll see your Francois QJE and raise you a Tirol Arista 96, which is a theory of collective behavior, of which corruption may be an example. And so there, it's sort of overlapping generations. People are arriving into the organization and people are leaving the organization from retirement or something. But all you can ever see is that the consultant you hired is from McKinsey. You can't see that it's Rick. And so that helps to explain how long, based on the arrival rates and the departure rates, how long do you have to have a new behavior in order for the audience to think that, okay, they've changed, right? And what they're thinking is, it's different people, right? That there were types and that it was a distribution skewed to the bad types under the corruption era, and fortunately it's, da-da-da-da-da. So what if we know it's the same people, right? So changing an equilibrium is a different problem than waiting for the types to change.
Yes.
Right? And so, can I say one word about the finding of the hospital stuff as a way to talk about that?
So I think it's really interesting.
Okay. So after the little X7 tigers and stags thing, comes a regression. Okay, so this is what we couldn't talk about in the AER papers and proceedings because then we couldn't be trying to publish the finding, right? Usual trap. This guy, this Peter Pronovost, who won MacArthur for this stuff, and if you don't want to go to the hospital because it means you're sick. If they put you in the ICU, it means you're really sick, and you're probably getting your nutrients and your medicine through a central line. Okay, so these are called CLABSI, central line associated bloodstream infections. And what you really don't want is to contract something you didn't have when you went into the hospital. right? A hospital-acquired infection, really bad. Okay, so they're out to reduce these, and the way they did it was they did a bunch of work at Hopkins. This is the checklist stuff, except that the whole point is it isn't just the checklist, right? And so. Yes, they have a checklist, and they did that at Hopkins, and it reduced the bloodstream infections by about a third. But then people said, well, I'm busy, I'm a doctor, I'm saving lives, and I know the checklist has 5 mind-numbingly simple things on it, like wash your hands, okay? And drape the patient with these special drapes, and use this super strong antiseptic, right? And they say, well, I'm saving lives here in the ICU. I couldn't find the drapes to drape the patient. I couldn't find the super strong antiseptic. So the second thing they did was they put a cart in every ICU that had the drapes and the antiseptic, okay? Bloodstream infections fell by another third. They finally did this comprehensive unit-based safety program, kind of, a colleague and I are trying to write something called Problems Might Be the Solution, right? Where this comprehensive unit-based safety program teed up a little tiny improvement exercise every week for 6 months, right? Found a problem to work on, and so the intervention, they show up and they measure your bloodstream infection rate. They ask a bunch of questions that I'll describe in a minute. They do their 6-month culture change exercise with these small projects, and then they come back 2 years after it started, 18 months after the culture change exercise, and they remeasure the bloodstream infection rate, and they measure these questions again, like, they're in the short paper, here, the nurses can agree or disagree strongly or weakly. I frequently have trouble expressing disagreement with staff physicians in this ICU. So the finding is the ICUs that most reduced their bloodstream infection rate are strongly correlated with those that most improved the nurse's answer to that question. Okay? And I don't know. Dean or somebody last night said, well, what do we know about changes in staffing and so on? But it's basically all the ICUs in Michigan. And so if they had enormous turnover, then that's a different problem. But in any case, that's the finding, right? That the ones that were able to, and I want to interpret that as build a different equilibrium. And let me, I could have put in that sequence from Ostrom to Turco to Brown, a fourth one would be my colleague Kate Kellogg, who's also an ethnographer, who works on 2 large academic medical centers that might or might not be commuting distance for her office. And she was there when the Graduate Council of Medical Education said surgery residents shouldn't work more than 80 hours a week. But of course it's not a bright line, because if you're going to harm the patient, you shouldn't leave. Right. Or if you're going to learn something really important, you shouldn't leave. And one of those hospitals is now on probation because they couldn't live up to the rule. And her analysis is that the other one had structural conditions that helped them build a new equilibrium. And those conditions are the handoff. When I come to Dr. Alston and I say, I'm about to hit 80 hours, right? And, suppose you're not one of the ones who's going to throw a fit and say, when I was a resident, we did 140, what's your problem, right? But it turns out Mike is one of those, right? So if the handoff, when I come to you and say I need to go, is in full view at the nurse's station, and Mike throws his clog at the wall, that has ripple effects everywhere, right? And that is what was happening in one hospital. This is all sort of, theory building here at the point. And in the other hospital, there are these relational spaces, as she calls them, where the handoffs, where the 3 of us, it's really the attending and the chief resident and the low-ranking one, first year, are working out both at the moment and ex post. So what situation was that? Should Bob have gone home or not? And da-da-da-da-da. So anyway, sorry, long answer.
Yeah. Is this on this?
No.
Oh, okay. Then the queue right now is Anthony, Jess, Sarah, Dean.
So my question, I'm afraid, is maybe too simple for the conversation, but why in your model on the end why are the models static? Why don't they update?
Yeah.
Why don't they move to maybe converge?
I think they might move. This again is where I need help. So the first version of that I would like to study is one where we just assume that everybody has the same interests. And I'm guessing that, even I have people in my brain and cognitive science department who can help me think about that. But where we intersect it with game theory is when we get to the point where we say, did we miscommunicate or am I being gamed? And then it's much less clear whether you should move it, right? But and the end of this long paper talks about, begins to try to think about, okay, even in a setting without conflict of interest, what do you do to move one? Okay, so that X7 would cause both of us in a setting with no conflict of interest to say, I guess we had different models, and move them, yes, update. And I don't know how fast that happens, but I think it gets much trickier where we have conflict of interest. That's where I want to go. Go to Q.
Yeah, Jess?
So we were sort of marveling at the large list of different people that you could reference in like the 5 slides that you presented. And I was sort of thinking about where does this not apply? What are the scope conditions on thinking about the world in this way?
Markets.
So in other words, I was thinking, is it just when there are formal, clear contracts that are easily enforceable and the incentives line up and everybody has, and it's been repeated enough that everybody has shared categories and shared meanings that are clear?
You're ahead of me. Sorry. So let's have 2 steps for where does this not apply. So one thing that might not apply is you don't need relational contracting at all because formal contracts, court enforceable kind, are just fine. That's what Abba Lerner was saying.
Okay, so that's the one that was
just supply and demand or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Okay. At the other extreme, people's defection temptations. I actually opened up my well-thumbed copy of this book, looking for boundary conditions where you shouldn't even try. Right, where the defection temptations are so severe that you're even with shared mental models, you're never going to get that to work. So that's a different boundary condition. And then I heard you say, okay, we're in the middle where formal's not good enough and defection's not so tempting. Players are too short run or something like that. So okay, we could hope to add value together, collaborate through these relational contracts. Now there's the second, where does this apply, which is, but can we build the right shared understanding? And so, yeah, I do think this is a big domain. As we were talking about at our reunion last weekend at the Center for Advanced Study thing, we had all kinds of people from Seattle trying to work on. They had government people, business people, foundation people, and on the ground not-for-profits doing good work people. And that's that's polycentric governance or something, right? And so you could tell me there's a CPR hiding in there or something, but it's. I think I was sitting pretty much where Mike was, and Eleanor Ostrom was sitting right there when the healthcare thing happened in like 2011 or something. And so the only sentence I have ever had the opportunity to utter to Eleanor Ostrom was the one that said, I was thrilled to be in Stockholm when you were there. I can't imagine really saying this to a Nobel laureate, but I think you're underplaying your hand. I think this stuff is important well beyond CPRs. So yes, I think it has to be broader.
Sarah?
Thank you. This, I think you've exercised some leadership in maybe trying to change some of the shared beliefs we have about what the Ostrom colloquium looks like. We'll see if we're just off equilibrium today or if it's
good. You ticked 11 jargon terms. Well done.
This has really opened up some kind of what I think are kind of fascinating things to think through. And one of the part of the issue is just figuring out what is the question that I want to ask because there are so many. But first, when you were talking about relational contracting and different ways to define it, one of the definitions that really spoke to me or that stood out was this a shared understanding of appropriate exercise of discretion. And so I immediately think this would be modeling in this way would be very interesting to apply to political cultures and democracies, like changes in democracies over time and so forth. So, I think this kind of problem is very relevant also in ways that we haven't spoken about yet.
Can I just hop in for 14 seconds right there? So there was a guy on the econ rookie market this year called David Yang who works on China and so on in political economy. I asked him what he would like to teach. He said, how about the political economy of non-democratic regimes? I said, oh, like firms, right? And so, why is it that I'm saying something that that's why. Go on.
And so one of the things that made me start to think about is the role of power in these, as you're modeling these sorts of interactions. And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about how you see power fitting in here and how that works. Because, I was thinking when you talked about the conversational firm and the issue of delegating voice but not decisions, and also this speaks to kind of the outcome of your ICU safety study, right?
Yep.
Which is there's something here about power and delegation, but not over delegation.
You
so
bet.
I was wondering where you are with that right now and sort of opportunities to flush that out more. That's what is most interesting.
I think that is the problem, right? And so it has. You can be in Seattle. You can be in the ICU. You can be talking about the conversational firm, but I don't think I have really anything helpful to say, right? I think practically everybody has some discretion over something, and then we need a shared understanding of what the appropriate exercise of discretion is, and so what Rebecca Henderson and I offered was 2 words: the credibility problem. So if I'm making you a promise that's abundantly clear to you, what does game theory help you do to analyze whether you should believe it? Is it credible? And the clarity problem. When I'm trying to make you a promise, have we understood it the same way? Right? And that's back to X7 and did we miscommunicate or am I being gamed? And so...
Yeah, I guess part of my question was if there's asymmetric power between those two, how does the model shift to accommodate, like who adjusts, right? And how much does each party adjust, right?
Good.
It's probably not symmetrical
Good.
adjustment.
So we have I can't quite point you to a figure, but that would be like a pretty good exam problem for an organizational economics PhD class. Before we problematize shared mental models, to say, so imagine that you're the principal and I'm the agent. Okay, you have all the discretion except for my effort or something, right? So what are the set of feasible, and that's like normal or econ these days, what's the set of feasible relational contracts where ideally we'd like to be generating more total value because we could divide it up, but we're constrained by the reneging temptation of the person with the power, and so what's the best we can do? So that's the normal case. So power shows up in that calculation. Building a shared understanding of how that power is supposed to be exercised is washed away in the modeling, right? We just find the best equilibrium and turn it on. That help a little?
Yeah.
All right.
Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about this more later.
Indeed. In fact, apparently I'm doing nothing once we eat our sandwiches, so whenever you're, I'm around. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to follow up because it seems to me that power is what comes in when you don't have a shared understanding, right? So it's not just like one of the options along the continuum of potential relational contracts. Is what gets stuff done when there's no shared understanding, right?
So let's talk about that some more at 4 o'clock.
Okay.
So I think there is power. I think there are 2 notions of shared understanding. One is, are we in an equilibrium? And the other is, do we have a shared meaning of what situation is this? And so what I hear is, hey, Bob, there's another sense of power. And indeed, a little bit like the discussion that Lee was starting. What if I can do something that changes everybody's categorization So that sounds like power in a way, which is totally not the power I was answering Sarah.
We've got Dean and Rick.
Yeah, I've got two short questions that are empirically motivated. So, what is there an empirical motivation for? I'm going to call this an approach rather than a kind of sort of focused model, so to speak, or is it more that you are comfortable with the existing set of theoretical approaches? And then second, how does one operationalize this stuff? And I'm thinking of the culture, the C and the big C and the little c stuff. How does one operationalize that in a way that you could separate it in an empirical setting from some other forces? So even in your ICU study, what did you measure there in your mind? And what's the linkage to the models that you're thinking about?
Okay, so as I hope I was clear about, there's totally an empirical motivation to the focus on relational contracts as useful for governance of hard problems, but this workshop knew that. So I was wrong last night. I said chapters 2, 3, and 4. It's actually chapters 3, 4, and 5. Okay? And 4 and 5 start looking at, that one didn't, it was fragile or it failed, right? I wish there were more dynamics. I'd like to see the dynamics of failure, okay? And so you may tell me that this isn't real empiricism, but the cases that I teach, both to my MBAs and my org econ PhD students, have the two kinds of dynamics I referenced: hiccups and earthquakes. Okay, and so those cases to me suggest that relational contracts stumbled and picked up again. So another version of this talk is called Discord, and Repair, in Relational Contracts, right? And so that's what that experiment that we didn't get to is about, is what happens after a stumble? Do you repair or not? And so the thick descriptions, the case studies, are my current empirical basis for thinking that shared mental models are important in whether you get to repair, okay? As for your second harder question of what would you do if you and this is back to my loop answer to Federica, right? That the goal is not the model, but economics will go nowhere without a model, and I think that the economists, they measure what they got taught in graduate school, right? So if you don't tell them this, they won't. No one's going to measure it, right? And so I don't know. I mean, no, is that crazy? But I think what we measured were these questions about. Another one is, yes, agree or disagree, strongly or weakly. Hospital administration doesn't knowingly put patients at risk, right? And so I hear this as, there you go, what Avner Greif would have liked to have measured in Genoa, right? And he has the historical, so we could actually ask him, and he had the historical record in people's letters or whatever that said, no, I really don't think that if I told that an agent had cheated me that anybody else would care, right? Whereas in the Maghrabi, I think that they would care. And so we're trying to ask about that. We're trying to ask about stuff in a way that's off the equilibrium path. So at that level, it's pretty Greifian.
When you're talking about value creation, you have the sort of prisoner dilemma or trust sort of model. It's being repeated, and you're able to get some value by getting away from the one-shot equilibrium. And then you have your nice stack hunt game with our assurance game. And I'm wondering about thinking about sort of, when we think about politics or something, we think about wheeling and dealing. When we think about economics, we think the big part of the value creation is trade. And in some of these examples, it sounds like that if the people could successfully communicate in a multidimensional world, what their trade-offs they're willing to make are about what kind of sporting events they want to see for their kids, and when they have time flexibility. If it's the nurses about flexibility they want, the doctors about the trade-offs they're willing to make on these different things. If there's communication about trade-offs that benefit both sides, it's getting closer, I think, to what you're saying about where you want to go with your stack hunt game with a little bit of conflict of interest. But talking about those conflicts or trade-offs, not even conflicts, right? And having that aspect to it, is that part of the story?
Absolutely. So then there's the credibility aspect where somebody asserts that they have the following view about a trade-off and that they're going to exercise their discretion in a certain way, right? So there's that normal game theory part. It's like what we were talking about Crawford and Sobel last night, right? The models that we have make it too easy to talk about everything that's relevant. I think the communication task is harder than the models I know. Crawford and Sobel, we get imperfect communication because I don't want to or you wouldn't believe, but not because we can't.
And I guess in the sort of trade-off world, it might not be that we have conflict like Crawford and Sobel, but there are mutual gains of us.
There are, which are there in Crawford and
stuff.
Sobel too, right? We wouldn't, we both want D to go up with S.
Right, some coordination feature. I guess that if you think about just a complicated world where there's so many different trade-offs that could be made.
Good.
And it's not obvious what these are. And so you're kind of revealing something about the potential trade-offs that you could make in a world where there's infinite number of possibilities, that maybe culture is helping us understand those or some that kind of direction. So think about.
I think that's broadly where I'm trying to go.
But let me bring up one thing that you mentioned that I think and I'm not sure how we model it, but I think we're missing a lot of information by not bringing it to the table, are the failures.
Yeah.
And I had a student, he's actually a PhD student in strategy, but he wrote an article about the tale the left tail tells.
Good. I love it.
Because he said with a lot of firm level data, you just have the survivors and people doing testaments. So he went back to everybody who incorporated in this particular asbestos abating business, and most of them fail within the first 2 years. But not including them, you really bias the whole story. But we do that a lot. And I'm not sure how easy it is to model it, or do we need to start more even descriptively? I mean, I'm thinking about, Federica's point, but also, was it Gibbons and Henderson, or just Henderson who did the Toyota General Motors?
Helper and Henderson.
Helper and Henderson, yeah. So I used that in my class last year. It was, a wonderful case of General Motors' inability to learn, and failing enormously to the extent that we have to bail them out. Well, we didn't have to. I wouldn't bail them out. But an administration decided they should bail them out. But the failure part I thought was really key there. And how do we, I guess, so methodologically, how do we think more about the failures? I had a student who did it empirically, which was really kind of painstakingly difficult, but he did it. So I guess that's the question. How do we do
and
this?
What are we could talk about that over lunch. What are the norms here?
Yeah, we should probably I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought that it was, you threw it out as saying we don't know enough about what I call the left tail. Or
I couldn't agree more that we need a whole bunch of different research styles, period, and about failures in particular.
Do you have other closing comments? And then some people, and we also have some extra sandwiches in case anyone wants to stay for lunch. I've got a staff meeting, unfortunately. But the sandwiches are being brought in here instead of going out. But do you have any final?
Thank you.